How did Squidward Tentacles almost get away with working in the Soviet Union as a right-hand man to the many leaders who served in that time? Before we answer that question, we'll need a little insight on Squidward Tentacles. Squidward Tentacles was born as Squidward Tentacles in 1893 in a small town called Volsk, Russia, but for simplicity, I'll just call him Squidward. When World War I began in 1914, Squidward was 21 and therefore was old enough to become a Russian soldier. Squidward, being a proud Russian and wanting to serve his country, proudly joined the Russian army. By late 1916, Squidward would be shot and injured in the Brusilov offensive, and therefore discharged from the Russian army on July 16, 1916. As 1917 rolled around, the Communist Party of Russia was beginning to rise, and Squidward noticed this. Squidward, who enjoyed the idea of communism rising in his country, joined the Bolsheviks in early February 1917. Squidward admired Vladimir Lenin, and his dream would come true in mid-February when he finally met him. Surprisingly, Lenin took a great liking to Squidward and made him his right-hand man.
It's an honor to meet you, Mr. Lenin. I'm a soldier of the Bolshevik army, sir. I will serve until the day I die.
This is when our story begins. When the Communist Revolution broke out in early March of 1917, Lenin and Squidward were sure they would take over Russia and convert it to communism. This they were correct about, because on June 16, 1923, the Bolsheviks, now known as the Russian Communist Party, had won the brutal civil war, and Russia was now known as the Soviet Union. But by very early 1924, the Lenin-Squidward bond began to diminish as Vladimir Lenin had suffered a stroke and just wasn't himself. Constant fights began to break out between Squidward and Lenin, and that's when Squidward had enough. Squidward killed Vladimir Lenin on January 21st, 1924, and made it look like complications from the stroke he'd had before. So when Joseph Stalin rose to power, after Lenin's death, he made Squidward his right-hand man. By late August 1939, Squidward would be 46 and still serving with Stalin. Squidward would actually be the person who convinced Stalin to sign the German-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact on August 23, 1939. When World War II began, Squidward was scared of the collapse of the Soviet Union, and Stalin supposedly called him a coward for this. That would be the beginning of the end for the Squidward-Stalin relationship, and when Germany invaded the Soviet Union on June 22, 1941, that made this deteriorate even more. By the end of World War II, the Squidward-Stalin relationship would be hanging on by a thread, and so on March 5, 1953, Squidward had enough and killed Stalin, making it look like he died from an illness. Squidward even urinated on Stalin to make it look even sadder, the fact that Stalin died soaked in his own urine. We will now skip forward many decades to September of 1991. Soviet police would begin to be skeptical of Squidward and would question him about the killings of past Soviet leaders. Before Squidward would be questioned for the 6th time, he would flee from the Soviet Union and hide out in a small island located in the Marshall Islands called Bikini Bottom, and change his name to Squidward Tentacles. He would also change his birthplace to the Marshall Islands. Squidward would hide out there for 8 years, witnessing the event of December 25th, 1991, also known as the fall of the Soviet Union. And by this time, Squidward would still be young, only 98 years of age, and would fall into a deep depression by this time, due to the fall of his motherland. Squidward would grow a long beard and barely show his face around the town he made himself comfortable in, which was called Bikini Bottom. By 1999, Squidward became comfortable around the town and would shave his beard and come out of hiding. Squidward would begin to work at a restaurant in Bikini Bottom for a supposedly fascist crab called Eugene Krabs. And by that time, Squidward would be aged 176 years. When Russian police stormed the Krusty Krab, Squidward would fear for his life and he would flee out back, but he would be imprisoned by the Russian police. He would die in prison 2 years later on September 29, 2071. And that's it. That's the story of how Squidward almost got away with working in the Soviet Union.